Two words which I think are commonly uttered out there in the YouTube RPG brigade are immersion and cinematic. Right? I like a cinematic style of roleplay and with deep immersion. You might hear a sentence like that fairly often, or you might hear people talking about ways to engage in cinematic roleplay, and you might sense an amount of disdain from some about cinematic roleplay because they're more into the realistic side where, it's not a free pass for the characters and stuff like this. Well, these are not, of course, the only ways to roleplay. Just ways that we tend to talk about more often in this pocket of the hobby. Perhaps there's something about video which brings those things out. Cinematic and its close cousin, maybe less popular, but offering similar requirements, a literary style gaming. These have grown in popularity over my time in the hobby, and I've been playing long enough to see it change quite a bit, to see new things come in, to see old things fade away into the background. And that's really the point of this clip, is while I am a very strong proponent of exploration, of first exploring your own preferences, your own talents, your own interests, filtering that through the shared perspectives, talents, and interests of your group in order to facilitate the best possible game, the most enjoyment you possibly can get out of the hobby. Certainly I'm a proponent of that. And then moving that exploration out into other games so that you learn more and more and more continually as you grow in the hobby and as the hobby itself grows and expands beyond you. There's always something new coming along. Sometimes it might be slow, and sometimes it might seem incomprehensible or stupid. But it's happening. It's out there. We don't want to be left behind, and at the same time, we don't want to leave things behind. Now, with the focus on a particular style of play, whatever that is, you cut yourself off from other styles. Now, if you don't enjoy those styles, that's a good thing. If you don't know about those styles, it can be a bad thing. And if those styles will slowly fade away and disappear, I also think that this is a bad thing. And I can give you an example. Using literary structures to import, because they're not native to the hobby, they're not native to the genre, the medium of roleplay. To import story structures like chapters, scenes, stories, chronicles, whatever. To import this story structure is to deny yourself the fluidity and the never-ending, ongoing nature of what roleplay used to be like before this became so common, where literally every time you got together, you just picked up from the last thing. Campaigns would last years. Years would stretch into multiple years, would stretch into decades for some people. They sat down at the table, they started playing a character, and they never stopped. And it wasn't play 4 sessions, that's the end of a story, it has to have this kind of arc within the story. This stuff didn't go on. It is, or it requires, skill in order to do that. This is not a video that's denigrating different techniques. It's a video that's looking at what do we gain, what do we give up when we choose a particular stance. Right? If I choose, as I have been in my Star Wars game around the table, I find we are drifting more and more and more toward a cinematic mode when we describe things. Right? It's becoming more and more like a movie. In the beginning, it was just little touches, like the opening crawl and starting episodes in space and panning down or panning up or panning over to a planet, that kind of thing. Little callbacks to Star Wars' cinematic source. But in the beginning, the combat was much grittier. The environmental challenges are much grittier. But as the game has gone on and we've found our voice, we found how we can narrate through the influence of the dice, we've kind of internalized the rule structure, the game itself, plus the genre we're in, are guiding us toward more cinematic play. And this is good. And lo, this is good. But on the opposite end, my RuneQuest campaign, I started out with the idea it would be cinematic. But through the filter of the group, through the filter of the genre, and through the filter of the mechanics themselves, although they do allow for a lot of cinematic detail, there's more to the game that directs our attention toward the inner life of the characters. So it's become more about how the characters react, how this scene, how this experience is affecting the characters and what it makes them want to do next. It's less about how it looks, of having an interesting camera angle or something like that. It's important to remember, in a role-playing game, there's no camera. This is an artificial construct you're importing into your game, and it has to have a purpose. Otherwise, why is it there? Anytime we have this kind of technique, one where the voice that we use to describe the action divorces us as the player from that scene, right? Asking us to think about things in ways that are alien to how the character would. Every time we create that distance, there's a benefit and there's a drawback. Right? Now, if you are a strong and vociferous proponent of immersion in character, this narrow band of immersion, then these cinematic techniques can actually work against your ability to hold on to that perspective until you get facile enough with them that the way you are performing these descriptions doesn't require too much out of character speech, or when it does, it has the gripping nature that enables all the people in the table to immerse in the scene. They're not immersed in their character, but they are immersed in the scene, much as they would be in a film. Two different states of immersion, two different types of immersion. One technique. That one technique, which is a barrier for many for in-character immersion, is an aid. It's a boon for in-scene immersion. So while I could use this technique in my RuneQuest campaign, it's not very valuable. It's not actually what we are getting from the game. It's not actually what we're seeking in the game. It's no longer an appropriate tool, even though that was the intention when we started. Likewise, in my Star Wars campaign, it was not the intention when I started, but it's quickly become a more and more appropriate tool for the way that we actually end up talking about Star Wars. Star Wars is a visual medium more than anything else, I suppose. We all grew up with seeing it first. So a cinematic technique is very appropriate. When I started this clip, I mentioned that our explorations can sometimes cause things to be lost. And this is true. We move beyond things that we've discovered are not useful, or we move beyond things that we discover we don't like. But new people are coming into the hobby all the time. And what sparked this clip was that in another group that I'm a member of, a question was asked. And the question was, what's the right way to play this game? So it was simply a rules interpretation. When they built the character, what does this information on the character sheet actually mean that they can do? And I am being intentionally vague to protect the identity of the questioner. I think it was a valid question. I think they had every right to ask it. Talking about it in an open forum like this could cause, let's say, less open-minded people to ridicule the person for asking the question. That's not appropriate, and not something I want to engage in. So they had a legitimate question. They went to the source material to answer the question and couldn't find the answer. And lots of other people who tried to help them find the answer were surprised that neither could they. Now, they had grown up playing this game, but when they looked back into the core books to answer the question, to show, look, on page 92, it says what you're talking about, you missed it. They discover that it doesn't say that on page 92. In fact, looking at it from that point of view, you're not going to find a rule that explicitly says you have to do it this way. Now, it is in there. Older hands eventually came forward and said, look, it's this way. You know, this side of your argument is correct. You know, you figured it out. Be happy. Go with it. Have fun playing the game. It is kind of weird that if you look for a specific rule, you can't find it, but this is where it's talked about. But what this highlights is that the original authors of the game could not conceive, it wasn't a part of the hobby then, they could not conceive of someone approaching their game and having that question. But it's more likely now for a new gamer, or at least a modern gamer, looking at this old game. Their question made perfect sense, and there was nothing in the usual places in the textbook to answer their question, which made the game actually unplayable. They couldn't proceed because it made no sense. Right? Imagine that this happens more often than you think. What if the early games from the late 70s, early 80s all have elements to them which have become incomprehensible over time because our perspectives have shifted, and without communicating with those people, we don't know how to realign our perspectives to make those core books comprehensible. What if the reason why people pick up Call of Cthulhu and then get driven to Trail of Cthulhu is simply because they don't really get how the skill system was intended to work, how pretty much everybody from that period would have approached it normally, naturally. Right? What if that were true? What if this works in both directions? What if a gamer from those early days reading modern games just scratches their head and keeps saying, why do you have to do it that way? You can just, or we've been doing that since. All right. Not being willing to shift that perspective, not being willing to weigh the effects of a thing with what you might gain or have to give up, means that we create conflict within the hobby where none needs to exist. But in role-playing communities, we can get a little heated. We can forget that it's one big community. And whether or not you want to replace cards with dice, or no dice at all, or use unusual dice, or have bidding, or roll a single die, or a die pool, or whatnot, what is the advantage of the thing that you're trying to do? What are the disadvantages of the thing that you're trying to do? How do those advantages and disadvantages align with the group you're actually playing with? This, first and foremost, should be fundamental to being a lifelong gamer. Being willing to explore more only makes your potential for fun better. When people are talking about immersion, what kind of immersion are they talking about? How deep are they talking about? How important is it to them? How do they achieve it? How can they achieve it? They're talking about cinematic techniques. Why is it being used? What does it accomplish? How is it being accomplished? Right? Literary techniques. What is the advantage of telling the story that way, of putting it into those structures? What does it allow that another form doesn't? Right? The long form, let's say the original form of role play, of the story stops when you're not playing it and continues when you are. Right? The never-ending campaign. Right? What is the advantage of that? What is the disadvantage of that? Does it match up or not match up with the needs of your group? This is the kind of exploration I think that has great value. If you haven't begun this kind of exploration, why not? And if you are in the midst of this kind of exploration, I guess I would offer the advice, if you're willing to take it, don't forget what came before. Don't blind yourself to what's coming next. It's one aspect of a very, very large and ever-expanding hobby. Something to be excited about, something to be continually explored.